Bueno, ahora comenzamos la sesión plenaria.
Well, now we will begin with the plenary session. The system is the one we talked about. Please connect to the internet. If you enter the Slido page in order to be able to post questions at the end of the day. You can also do it through the paper you have been given together with a microphone. You have to enter Slido with this code, #6899, and you can post questions both to His Excellency, Mr. Barkindo, as to the other members of the panel. And now, without further ado, I would like to give you an overview of His Excellency's CV, if we can call it so. He began as his Secretary General, and he was appointed on the 1st of August 2016, and he has a Master in Political Sciences and a post degree in Management of Oil and a Business Administration Master's also.
Culminating in his appointment as Group Managing Director as CEO in January 2009. As an OPEC veteran, His Excellency served as Nigeria's OPEC National Representative for a record of 15 years and was also OPEC Governor. In 2006, His Excellency was appointed acting OPEC Secretary General. Also, a passionate advocate of the climate change initiative, His Excellency Barkindo led Nigeria's technical delegations at the negotiations that produced the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change at the Kyoto Protocol. As OPEC Secretary, His Excellency has spearheaded several historic and market-transforming initiatives, steering the adoption of the Algiers Accord in September 2016, the Vienna Agreement in November 2016, and the Declaration of Cooperation reached with non-OPEC producers in December 2006. So now we will hear the words of Dr. Barkindo, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, distinguished delegates to this very important and, may I say, very timely round table, which is coming at this very opportune time in the transition. And may I also add, coming just a day or two after our crucial meeting with our non-OPEC partners in Algiers. And let me also bring to you warm greetings from Algiers to all of you, and the best wishes that they have asked me through the chairman of CEPSA, HE Mohammad Sanusi, who also happens to be the current president of OPEC. For me and my colleagues back in Vienna, I think this is one very important round table that we cannot afford to miss for the second year. I would sincerely apologize for not being able to join you at the inaugural session last year due to circumstances completely beyond us. In this regard, I would also like to thank personally Mr. Inigo Diaz de Espada, the chairman of the Spanish Committee of the World Energy Council and the chair of this session, and also thank the previous esteemed speakers in the introductory session, Pedro, Miguel, Emilio, all of you, I think, expressed some very flattering, if I may say, commentaries on us in OPEC. I take it in very good faith, and wish to thank you sincerely for those comments of yours, and to assure you that we are in this boat together, whether we are in OPEC, whether we are in non-OPEC, whether we are part of the IOC community or the National Oil Companies community. We belong to this same industry, the same boat, and that the forces of globalization have really broken down these barriers irreversibly, and hence the common interests and the mutual objectives that we all have in ensuring that this world continues to be a better place for all of us and for future generations consuming energy, whatever source it is, to meet our developmental goals. OPEC has always been a strong and positive supporter of the World Energy Council, and I'm extremely honored to be speaking here today to this distinguished gathering. I also fondly recall, Emilio, that one of my first speaking engagements as OPEC Secretary General was at the 23rd World Energy Congress in Istanbul in October 2016. The chairman, Mr. Suhail Al-Mazrui, has also been a skillful advocate for OPEC during his tenure as OPEC president, helping push the organization's objectives at events such as this one, as well as through the historic declaration of cooperation between 25 OPEC and non-OPEC producers, which Pedro, in his opening remarks, made reference to. The declaration of cooperation has focused on restoring a sustainable stability to the industry through what I might term innovative and groundbreaking cooperation. And let me stress that the impact of this cooperation has exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The cooperative efforts have helped accelerate the return of balance to the global oil market, return much needed optimism to the industry, with investments now gradually picking up, and it has had a positive effect on the global economy and trade worldwide. Moreover, it has also led to a significant change in industry-wide and public perceptions about our organization, OPEC. OPEC has ably demonstrated its credentials as a body committed to international cooperation and honoring its commitments and promoting mutual respect among all nations. The declaration is now a permanent feature of the global energy scene, establishing a novel framework for producing countries, whilst also taking into account the vital interests of consumer countries as well as the global economy. The importance of these developments, specifically in terms of helping achieve market stability, and just as importantly sustaining it, is clearly vital across all time frames. While the focus for many is obviously on the short term, we need to recall that the short, medium, and long terms are all interlinked. We cannot view any of them in isolation. This is the focus of OPEC's World Oil Outlook, with the 28th edition very much hot off the press after being launched only 2 days ago in Algiers at an event to mark the secondary anniversary of the seminal Algiers meeting that set us on the path that eventually led to the Declaration of Cooperation in 2016. The outlook aims to bridge the linkages between the various time frames to enable the organization to share its views and analysis of the global oil and energy markets. It was the great Spanish artist Salvador Dali who said, and I quote, "He who wants to interest others must provoke them," unquote. It is with this thought that I am here today, as I present the findings of our 2018 World Outlook as a means to stimulate discussions, steer debate, and hopefully foster knowledge sharing. I think we all appreciate that the future is one laden with challenges and uncertainties, but also many opportunities. There will no doubt be areas where we may all agree, as well as areas where there will be some divergences. I very much welcome your feedback and your questions. Please feel free to provoke me as well. The theme of today's event relates to energy futures and energy transitions. It is evidently an extremely timely and relevant theme, given that there is currently much talk of the energy transition. In this regard, it is important to ask the question, what does this actually mean for the energy mix and for people around this planet in which we all live? Today, we hear media reports almost on a daily basis of a future world of only renewables, where electrification will come to dominate the transportation sector and where fossil fuels are set to be consigned to history. All of these statements and reports offer an extremely misleading view. It is important that we all look beyond the headlines and bring some analysis and perspectives to our energy future. What is clear is that the world will need more energy in the decades to come. It is easy to appreciate why. In OPEC's World Oil Outlook, the size of the global economy in 2040 is estimated to be more than 200% than that of 2017. And over the same period, global population is projected to reach around 9.2 billion people, an increase of over 1.6 billion people from today's level. We should also not forget that today, around 3 billion people lack access to clean fuels and efficient technologies for cooking, and almost 1 billion are still without access to electricity. It is vital that this is addressed. Energy access is not a luxury. It has to be seen as a necessity, and it is one of the fundamental rights of people as recognized by the United Nations. There is huge potential for socio-economic development in terms of expanding access to modern energy services. We expect global energy demand to increase by a robust 33% between 2015 and 2040, which is driven predominantly by developing countries, which see almost 95% of the overall growth. Distinguished friends and colleagues, energy will be required to power more homes, more services, more businesses, more cars, more planes, more ships, more technologies. We could go on and on and on and on. At the same time, however, we need to recognize the threat posed by climate change to our environment. All our eminent speakers, Pedro, Emilio, Miguel, have all made references to the challenge of our time, the challenge of climate change, and the challenge of how do we respond to this new phenomenon. Let me stress here that OPEC remains fully engaged and supportive of the Paris Agreement. Indeed, all our member countries have signed up to the Paris Agreement. Most of our member countries have already ratified the Paris Climate Agreement. Several of our member countries are already engaged in huge investments on the issue of climate. Therefore, we firmly believe that a global consensus from the multilateral process remains the best and most inclusive way for all nations to collectively mitigate or adapt to the impacts of climate change based on the core principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Thus, our 2018 OPEC outlook underscores that OPEC is fully aware of the dual challenge of meeting growing energy demand while constantly improving the environmental footprint of all the energies we use. To put it simply, the basic energy challenge can be summed up in two questions. The first is, how can we ensure there is enough supply to meet expected future demand growth? Secondly, how can this growth be achieved in a sustainable way, balancing the needs of people in relation to their social welfare, the economy, and the environment? What the outlook emphasizes is that all energies are required. It is not about choosing one energy source over another. In fact, the reference case for this year's outlook sees all energy sources expanding over the entire forecast period, except coal that peaks around 2030. Nonetheless, it is vital we appreciate just what each energy source provides today and what they can provide in the decades ahead. There is no doubt that renewables such as solar and wind will continue to significantly expand their role. They are expected to have the highest average growth rate of around 7.4% per annum over the period to 2040, although it is important to remember their current low base. OPEC member countries recognize and support the development of renewables, as I have said earlier. Many of our countries have great sources of solar and wind, and significant investments are already being made in these fields. Nuclear is also expected to witness some expansion in its share of the global energy mix, and biomass and hydropower are forecast to maintain their shares in the years ahead. Overall, these renewable energies and nuclear are expected to increase their share in the energy mix from around 18% in 2015 to about 25% by 2040. The upshot of this is that all of the three current main primary sources of energy, oil, gas, and coal, are still anticipated to supply about 3/4 of the energy mix by 2040. Oil is expected at around 28%, gas at 25%, and coal at just over 22%. From the perspective of oil and gas, it underscores the fact that they will remain central to supplying the growing global population with the critical energy it needs in the decades to come. Of course, you may say to me, well, you will say this, Mohammed, because you are OPEC Secretary General. But I am also a realist like most of you. I do not see any outlook projecting that other energies will come close to overtaking oil and gas in the decades ahead. In terms of oil specifically, I think the key message from our outlook is that there is no doubt that oil will remain a fuel of choice for the foreseeable future. We see oil demand increasing by around 14.5 million barrels a day between now and 2040 to reach close to 112 million barrels a day. Moreover, this is the second consecutive year we have raised our oil demand numbers for 2040. I would also like to dig a little deeper into the oil demand in our outlook to look at some of the sectors driving this growth, as well as highlight the potential impact of electric vehicles. In terms of sectors, transportation remains the major incremental demand driver to 2040, with expectations for an increase of more than 8 million barrels a day, mostly in the road transportation sector, which sees growth of about 4.1 million barrels a day. As you would expect, this demand growth is driven by the expected increase in total vehicle fleet for passenger as well as commercial vehicles. This is projected to increase by over 1.1 billion vehicles to hit close to 2.4 billion vehicles by 2040. Here it is important to underscore that the majority of the growth continues to be for conventional vehicles. Nonetheless, the outlook does seem the long-term share of electric vehicles in the total fleet expanding and reaching a level of around 13% in 2040, supported by falling battery costs as well as policy support. For all alternative fuel vehicles, the figure, according to our outlook, is around 18%. While this is certainly an impressive expansion for electric vehicles, given that levels were well below 1% in 2017, it does need to be placed in the context that conventional vehicles, including hybrids, are still expected to make up 82% of the vehicle fleet by 2040. While there are various sensitivities that could shift these numbers, both upwards and downwards, there is a message to be derived from this. Conventional vehicles will remain the mainstay of the road transportation sector. And I should add there are clearly possibilities to further improve the efficiencies of these engines and the fuels that they use. it is also important to note the expected oil demand growth in the petrochemical sector, which for the current world oil outlook for the first time sees more growth than in the road transportation sector over the focus period for 2040. Global demand in this sector is estimated to expand by 4.5 million barrels a day by 2040. The largest increase is projected for developing countries, most notably Asia and OPEC member countries, driven by demand for petrochemical products and the availability of feedstock in these regions. Distinguished colleagues and friends, let's now turn to the supply side of the equation. On the supply side, non-OPEC is set to increase supply by more than 9 million barrels a day between 2017 and 2027, with the major driver being the U.S. tight oil. But there are also significant additions coming from Canada, Brazil, and Kazakhstan. In fact, global tight oil supply is set to grow to over 15 million barrels a day by the second half of the 2020s, thus making up almost a quarter share of non-OPEC supply at its peak. Beyond this period, however, non-OPEC supply is set to decline by around 4 million barrels a day, chiefly due to losses in U.S. tight oil production, as well as depletion in other regions such as Asia Pacific, the North Sea, and South America. What does it mean? It means that in the long term, the demand for crude oil from OPEC is projected to increase to around 40 million barrels a day in 2040, up from the current 32 million barrels a day in 2018. The share of OPEC crude in the global oil supply is therefore estimated to increase from 34% in 2017 to 36% in 2040. To meet the expected global expansion, we require huge investments. We also need to consider that new barrels are needed not only to increase production, but to accommodate for natural declines of existing fields. Oil-related investment requirements across the upstream, midstream, and downstream are estimated around $11 trillion in the period up to 2040. I can see our friend Emilio nodding his head. On a positive note, we have seen investment picking up again this year after the significant downturns witnessed in 2015-2016. For the first time in the history of our industry, we have witnessed 2 consecutive years of sharp contraction in investments in 2015-2016 as a consequence of this severe downturn that we went through. However, we need to remain watchful and vigilant to ensure the necessary future investments are made. Now, companies such as CEPSA have a leading role to play in this regard. And today, I look forward to discussing further with my friend Pedro and his colleagues on their investment outlook into the medium and long term. It is important to remember that the foundation for investment and growth can only come through balance and stability in the market. it is always worth recalling that long-term security of supply is intrinsically linked to short-term conditions. In this regard, we in OPEC remain fully committed to investments across the whole industry value chain, and the issue of returning global investment is a core focus of our declaration of cooperation with our non-OPEC partners. When thinking about our energy future, particularly when viewing it from the perspective of the industrialized world, we need to remember how important oil and gas have been to their past. They have transformed their economies and their societies. They have provided heat, light, and mobility. They have created and sustained economic growth and unprecedented prosperity. However, we should not forget that this has not been the story for everyone around this planet. When we start up our cars in the morning, switch on our modern cookers, turn on a light bulb, we need to recognize that these everyday things we take for granted are still unknown to billions of people across the world who continue to suffer from abject energy poverty. These are people that need their voices heard. They need access to reliable, safe, and secure modern energy services at scale. Of course, the economics of wanting more, coupled with growing populations and rising energy demand, has created challenges that were not foreseen when Thomas Edison was developing the light bulb, or when Henry Ford was producing the car. I am talking here about the environmental challenge of our time. In this regard, we need to recognize that the issue is not oil and gas per se. The challenge is the emissions that come from burning these energy sources. It is a challenge we need to face head-on, and I believe it is a challenge that can be overcome. Given what I have already said, it would be wrong of us to dismiss oil and gas as part of history. I am a firm believer that solutions can be found in technologies that reduce and ultimately eliminate carbon emissions. We need to continually look to develop, evolve, and adopt cleaner energy technologies, as well as all-inclusive and non-discriminatory energy policies that enable us to meet the expected future energy demand in a sustainable and environmentally friendly manner. One word I have uttered on many occasions over the past 2 years is central to all this, and that word has been, and it is, and will continue to be cooperation. The Declaration of Cooperation has shown what can be achieved through collaboration in challenging times. It helped turn the tide of the oil market, and we are now beginning to see stability gradually and steadily returning. However, this kind of cooperation needs to be undertaken not only in terms of times of crisis or instability, but also when the market is stable and balanced. Dialogue is vital at all times, whether between OPEC and non-OPEC, or between OPEC and the international oil companies, or between OPEC and the consuming countries. Dialogue remains vital. Over the years, OPEC has pushed many forms of energy dialogues and cooperation, including with the European Union since 2005, with the Russian Federation, with China, with India, and we have held several collaborative efforts with the International Energy Forum, the IEA in Paris, various initiatives with the G20, and meetings with industry stakeholders such as your good selves. In this regard, we look forward to meeting the European Commissioner for Energy, Miguel Arias-Cañete, and his team later this year through the EU-OPEC Energy Dialogue to discuss a variety of issues, including the future energy mix, policies, and technologies. The outcome of our roundtable today, hopefully, will feed into this dialogue that we will hold in Berlin later this year. Of course, I cannot stand here and say dialogue will mean we find solutions to everything. We do not live in a perfect world, but it is important for all stakeholders to look for shared realistic solutions where and when appropriate. In terms of talk of an energy transition, I think it is important to leave you, dear colleagues and friends, with a few key messages from our world oil outlook. The future of energy will require all energy sources to meet not only current but rising demand. It is not about choosing one energy source over another. It is vital that we lay out a practical and realistic future energy path and appreciate what each energy source can deliver. Oil and gas are expected to still meet over 50% of the world's energy needs in 2040. It is vital that we continue to improve energy efficiency and develop cleaner energy technologies. Exactly about 30 years ago, if you recall the Brundtland report, Mrs. Brundtland of Norway, who chaired the UN study group on the issue of the environment. And I recall one of the conclusions of that study, that at that time, fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal accounted for 82% of the global energy mix. And she did a very thorough job with her colleagues on that study group. 30 years later, we are reminded by Pedro, I believe here, that we are still at that number, 82%. So let's be realistic. Let us face the issues at stake and the challenge at stake, which is the emission. And it lies in adopting appropriate technologies that is not beyond our reach, together with appropriate policies by governments in order to overcome this challenge of our time. And we need to ensure that energy is made available to all of the world's citizens. This entails a transition to a more inclusive world in which every person has access to this source, whether young or old, whether poor or rich, whether living in the north or south. We want to see a world where no one is left behind. On behalf of OPEC, I wish to thank you sincerely for this kind invitation and for being patient to listen to our outlook. I commend this outlook to all and sundry. Thank you very much.